The little bell above the diner door went ding-ling as Steven Seagal pushed it open and walked inside. Evelyn's diner sat on a lonely stretch of highway, halfway between nowhere and the next tiny town. The building looked old from the outside, with paint peeling a little on the sign, but inside it felt warm and cozy. The air was filled with the smell of bacon grease, fried eggs, and coffee. It was the kind of smell that clung to your clothes if you stayed too long, but Steven didn't mind. The jukebox in the corner hummed softly, playing old songs that had been played 1,000 times before. The sound mixed with the quiet chatter of the few people inside. The diner wasn't very busy. A few big truck drivers sat on stools at the counter, sipping hot coffee while their heavy coats hung on the backs of their chairs. A family of 4 sat at a booth, the kids whispering and giggling as they shared a basket of fries. At the window seats, 2 old men were in the middle of an argument about baseball, their voices bouncing back and forth like a ping-pong ball. Steven Seagal stepped in quietly. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wear bright clothes or shiny shoes. He wore a simple black jacket and boots that had seen a lot of miles. His face was calm, his eyes steady. He looked like a man who had seen a lot, but didn't need to brag about it. He nodded politely to the waitress as he walked past, then slid into a booth near the back of the diner. He liked places like this, quiet spots with low chatter and hot coffee, places where he could breathe and think. When the waitress came over, Steven ordered a burger and a black coffee. Nothing fancy. He never wanted to be fancy. While he waited, he let his eyes wander to the window. Outside, the afternoon sunlight stretched long shadows across the cracked asphalt parking lot. A tumbleweed bounced across the road, rolling lazily in the breeze. Steven thought maybe he'd have a peaceful meal here. But peace in his life never lasted long. The quiet inside the diner broke all at once. The front door slammed open with such force that the bell above it almost flew off its hook. Bang! The noise made everyone in the diner jump and turn their heads. A giant man stepped inside. He was enormous, at least 6'4", maybe taller. His shoulders looked wide enough to block the doorway. His arms bulged with thick muscles, and tattoos crawled up his neck and across his arms. He wore a black leather vest, and the lights above shone off his bald head. His heavy jaw worked back and forth like he was chewing on gravel. Behind him came 3 smaller men, but nobody paid them much attention. All eyes were on the giant. He didn't hurry. He didn't smile kindly. He just scanned the diner slowly, looking at everyone the way a wolf might look at sheep. He seemed to be deciding which person he wanted to pick on first. The waitress froze. Her hand hovered over her little order pad, but she didn't move. Evelyn, the old owner of the diner, stopped behind the counter, her eyes wide. She had seen trouble walk into her diner before, but never trouble this big. The giant's gaze swept across the room and finally stopped on Steven's booth. His lips curled into something between a grin and a snarl. He stomped forward. Each step was heavy, making the spoons and forks on the tables rattle. The sound of his boots hitting the tile floor filled the room like drumbeats. He stopped at Steven's booth and leaned down. His huge shadow fell across the table, covering Steven's coffee. "You're sitting in my spot," the giant rumbled. His voice sounded like 2 stones grinding together. Steven didn't flinch. He calmly stirred his coffee, as if the giant wasn't even there. Slowly, he lifted his eyes, looking up at the man with a steady, unreadable gaze. "There are plenty of other seats," Steven said softly. The giant chuckled. It was a deep, ugly laugh that made the hairs on the back of people's necks rise. "I said you're in my spot. Can't you hear me, old man?" The diner went silent. Even the jukebox seemed to hush, as if it didn't want to miss what would happen next. Steven set his spoon down carefully. His movements were slow, steady, deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I hear fine," Steven said. His eyes locked on the giant's. "What I don't hear is respect." The giant's grin faded. His jaw tightened. Then, with a loud smack, he slammed his meaty hand down on the table so hard that Steven's coffee cup jumped and nearly spilled. "You think you're tough," the giant growled. "You're looking at Victor. I run this town. When I say move, you move." Steven leaned back in his seat and folded his arms across his chest. His calmness only made Victor angrier. "You don't know who you're talking to." Victor snarled. His huge hand shot out and grabbed Steven by the collar. With a yank, he pulled Steven halfway out of the booth. Chairs scraped as people pushed back, unsure whether they should run or stay frozen. Steven's eyes narrowed. His voice was calm but carried a sharp edge. "Take your hand off me." But Victor only squeezed tighter. Muscles bulged. Veins pulsed in his arms. He sneered down at Steven. "What? You gonna call the cops? You're nothing but some old man sipping coffee." Steven's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "I don't call the cops." Victor sneered harder. "Then who are you gonna call?" Steven's eyes hardened like steel. His answer came quiet, but it hit the air like thunder. "Me." Before Victor could react, Steven moved. His hand shot up like lightning, clamping onto Victor's thick wrist. With one smooth twist, Steven bent the wrist sideways. It looked effortless, but Victor grunted in pain, his massive body bending despite himself. Shock flickered across his face. Steven stood smoothly, rising from the booth. He seemed taller now, calm but dangerous. His feet shifted into a balanced stance, his body loose, but ready. People in the diner could feel it. This wasn't just an ordinary man. This was a trained fighter. "You picked the wrong diner," Steven said softly. Victor's men shifted uneasily, glancing at each other. The giant tried to shake off the pain and forced a chuckle. "That didn't hurt. I'll break you in half." With a roar, Victor lunged. His bulk crashed forward like a runaway train, fist swinging down toward Steven's head. Steven moved like water. He sidestepped smoothly, caught Victor's arm, and guided it past him. The punch smashed into the counter instead. Crash! Plates shattered. Cups flew. The wooden counter cracked under the sheer power of the blow. Victor roared in pain, pulling his knuckles back, blood dripping. The whole diner gasped, but Steven didn't even blink. He stood there like a calm storm, ready to break loose. The waitress whispered under her breath, "Oh my God." Victor spun back around, his face twisted with rage. His chest rose and fell like a bull ready to charge again. "You had your warning," Steven said quietly, his voice steady as stone. Victor bared his teeth and lunged again, his fists like cinder blocks. He swung at Steven's face, the punch whistling through the air. Steven slipped aside, caught the arm, and twisted again. This time, he threw Victor down. The giant slammed into a booth, snapping the table in half. Dishes and silverware flew everywhere. The family that had been sitting there screamed and scrambled out of the way, holding their kids close as they ducked behind another booth. Victor cursed, kicking the broken table aside as he stood. His 3 crew members finally snapped out of their hesitation. "Get him!" Victor barked. The first thug rushed forward with a wild swing. Steven ducked smoothly, then drove his open palm into the man's chest. The thug flew backward, crashing over 2 stools at the counter and landing in a heap. The second grabbed at Steven's jacket, but Steven spun with him, trapping his arm. With one sharp motion, Steven slammed him headfirst into the jukebox. Screech! The music warped and died. The jukebox sparked and went silent. The third thug froze, trembling, his eyes wide. "Go!" Victor shouted again. Shaking, the man obeyed. He ran at Steven with all the bravery he could muster, but Steven caught him by the throat with one hand, shoved him back, and swept his legs. The man hit the ground with a thud, coughing and wheezing, unable to rise. Now all 3 of Victor's men lay groaning on the floor. The diner was silent except for Victor's heavy breathing. It was just him and Steven now. The giant pulled himself up, his face red with fury. Blood dripped from his split knuckles. His lips curled in a sneer. "You think you're some kind of fighter? You're just a washed-up actor." Steven's eyes stayed locked on him, calm and unshaken. "You're about to learn the difference." Victor roared like a bull and charged again, head lowered, arms wide. This time, he wanted to wrap his massive arms around Steven in a crushing bear hug. If Victor's attack had worked, it would have been terrible. His ribs might have been crushed. Maybe worse. Victor was big, strong, and dangerous. Everyone in the diner thought Steven might not make it. But Steven moved. He shifted his weight, just a little, and stepped to the side at the last second. Then he lifted his arm and brought his elbow down hard across Victor's back. The sound was sharp, like wood hitting wood. The giant stumbled forward, his huge frame lurching like a falling tree. He bellowed in pain, his roar shaking the walls of the diner. Dishes rattled on tables. Forks clinked against plates. Steven didn't give him time to recover. He spun quickly, faster than anyone thought he could move. His hand curled into a fist, and he brought it down hard, like a hammer, smashing into Victor's jaw. Crack! The sound was awful, like a branch snapping in the forest. People winced. Some covered their mouths in shock. Victor staggered back, his knees wobbling. His eyes blinked, dazed and dizzy, but somehow he stayed on his feet. "Stay down," Steven warned him. His voice was calm but dangerous, like thunder far away. But Victor wasn't ready to quit. He spat blood on the diner floor, red mixing with the white tiles. His grin was wild, his teeth red, his eyes bright with fury. "That's all you got," he growled. Steven's calm cracked into steel. His face didn't twist, but something in his eyes hardened. "No," Steven said quietly. "That was mercy." And then he moved, faster than anyone thought possible for a man his size. His hands blurred like shadows. He struck Victor's wrist, snap. The giant's grip broke instantly, his hand jerking back in pain. He twisted Victor's elbow, crack. Pain shot up the bully's arm, making him howl. He drove his knee into Victor's gut, wham. The big man folded forward like a collapsing tent. And then came the finishing move. Steven grabbed the back of Victor's thick neck, fingers locking tight. With one strong pull, he slammed Victor's face into the counter. Bang! The impact rattled silverware. Spoons clattered. Coffee cups tipped over. The whole diner gasped in one loud breath. Victor slumped against the counter. His massive frame sagged, too weak to stand straight. He was still awake, but just barely. His men groaned on the floor. None of them dared rise. They had seen enough. Steven let go and stepped back. His body relaxed. His shoulders eased. But his eyes stayed sharp, steady, unshaken. He looked around at the crowd, their eyes wide with fear and awe. Then he looked back at Victor. "You walk into a place," Steven said, his voice calm but clear. "You threaten strangers. You humiliate people. And you think fear makes you powerful." The room was silent. Even the jukebox stopped playing, like it knew to listen. "But fear doesn't last," Steven continued. "Respect does. And now you'll remember that." Victor whimpered, clutching his jaw. His lips moved, but no words came out. He was too broken to reply. A waitress, still trembling, stepped forward. Her hand shook so badly, she nearly dropped her notepad. Her voice was small and shaky. Mr. Seagal. Thank you." Steven nodded once. His calm returned. He turned back to Victor. His next words were sharp, like a blade cutting the air. "If you ever come back here," Steven warned, "if you ever touch anyone in this town again, you'll see me. And next time, I won't stop at mercy." With that, Steven walked back to his booth. He sat down, lifted his coffee cup, and sipped as though nothing had happened. The bell over the diner door jingled faintly in the silence. And in that silence, every person there knew one truth. Victor, the giant bully, had picked the wrong man. He had picked Steven Seagal. The diner stayed frozen, long after Victor slumped against the counter. His big body crumpled like a broken statue. The once cocky, towering gang leader now looked small. His back was hunched. His breath rattled. Blood dripped from his split lip. His crew lay groaning on the floor, too scared to move, too hurt to help him. Steven Seagal stood over them all. His chest rose calmly. He wasn't even breathing heavy. His hands hung relaxed at his sides. His eyes stayed steady and calm. He looked more like a man waiting for his breakfast than someone who had just destroyed 4 thugs. "Get up," Steven said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than any shout. Victor groaned. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself upright. He leaned on the counter for balance. His chest rose and fell in gasps. His smirk was gone. His wild grin had vanished. His eyes were wide now, filled with something new. "Fear. Please," Victor muttered. You don't understand who I am." Steven's gaze cut into him like a knife. I know exactly who you are, Steven said. You're a bully. A man who walks into quiet places, looking for smaller people to crush. But today you picked wrong. You picked me. Victor shook his head weakly, still trying to hold on to some shred of power. I run this town, he said, his voice trembling. People fear me. Steven stepped closer. His boots made no sound on the floor. The entire diner leaned in, holding their breath. Fear doesn't last, Steven said. His words were calm, but every letter carried power. Respect does. And right now, you've got neither. He grabbed Victor's leather vest in one strong hand and yanked him forward. Crash! He slammed the giant down onto a booth table. The wood cracked under the weight. Plates shattered. Glasses tumbled to the floor and smashed. Victor wheezed, pinned by a force he couldn't match. His huge body shook as Steven pressed him harder into the table. You shoved me. You threatened me. You thought your size made you untouchable. Steven growled. His voice was low and dangerous. Now you're going to apologize to everyone in this room. Victor shook his head. His pride clung to him, weak but stubborn. No. Steven leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper, cold as ice. Say the words, he warned, or I'll put you through this table and leave you in pieces. The diner was so quiet that people could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Victor's swollen face twitched. His lips trembled. Finally, the words burst out. I'm sorry, he whispered. His voice was weak and broken. I'm sorry. Louder, Steven ordered. I'm sorry. Victor cried out. His voice cracked, echoing off the diner walls. He turned his head toward the waitress, toward the scared family in the corner. I'm sorry. I won't hurt anyone again. Relief rippled through the diner like a wave. Some people clapped softly. Others nodded, eyes wide. Everyone there knew they would never forget this moment. Steven suddenly let go. Victor collapsed to the floor, clutching his ribs. His 3 men crawled toward him, but their bodies were sore and broken. They could barely move. Steven stood tall. He straightened his jacket, calm again, like nothing had happened. He looked around at the room, his voice soft but steady. You don't let men like this own your streets, Steven said. You don't feed their fear. Stand tall, and they'll crumble. He turned to Evelyn, the elderly owner of the diner. She stood behind the counter, pale but grateful. You're safe now, Steven told her simply. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Thank you, Mr. Seagal. Steven nodded once. Then he walked back to his booth. He sat down. He lifted his coffee cup. He sipped. It was as if a storm had passed and calm had returned. Slowly, the room came back to life. People whispered to one another. Waitresses began cleaning up broken dishes. The jukebox buzzed faintly again, a soft tune filling the silence. But Victor was no longer the same. The huge, bulky, muscular gang leader who had strutted into Evelyn's diner, threatening to take it for himself, now lay broken and beaten. His pride was gone. His fear was shown. His name was ruined. He had picked a fight with Steven Seagal, and it had cost him everything. As Steven finished his coffee in peace, one truth lingered in the air, as clear as the smell of bacon and coffee beans. Some men measure strength by size. Steven Seagal measured strength by skill, and skill always wins.